Let's learn girl parts. Okay, so last week, if I remember right, we went through these things here. Oogonium. What did that do again? What do oogonium do? Big eggs, right? The stuff before birth, puberty, meiosis stuff you knew nothing about from 112. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to amplify that understanding. So, on this overhead, to get your bearings, we have some language we have to learn. So, this thing in red is always labeled an OO something, which means egg, right? This red thing on this side of the picture is this little teeny pink thing on this side of the picture. Right? So this is just blown up from there. So we got to figure out what that yellow stuff is that isn't the red stuff. What's the yellow thing?
Yolk.
Follicle. So we need to learn tonight very well what a follicle is. So describe it for me. What is it?
A yolk.
Here. So in English, partial English, cells around an oocyte. And an oocyte means what again?
Mother cell.
You can say egg, that's cool. I'm not arguing which one. So in English, I zoom this up. The oocyte is the center thing, that's the egg, quote, quote. The follicle is the yellow stuff around it. So you have a follicle, which are cells around the egg. They're not the same thing. So this is not anatomically true, but an analogy that's helpful is, what do you call the thing around a bird's egg? A nest, like nest. So you can think of the follicle as the nest where the eggs are. That's not a bird thing, okay? But if you have eggs and the nest is a separate entity. So what we're going to do is look at this overhead as we go down. So remember you told me last week that once you hit puberty, what do your eggs do? They do meiosis and they develop, right? So let's look at our follicle. Look in this picture here. What are your follicles doing when the egg is growing? They're growing bigger. So if I have bigger eggs, I need a bigger nest. So my follicle is growing along with my eggs. Or my follicular cells are increasing along with my oocyte. Make sense? Okay, so we have growing follicle with a growing egg. Okay, smarties. Explain that picture there.
Is it ditching the follicle for a smaller egg?
Who's ditching a what for where? What? So what's this pink thing again? That's the egg or oocyte. What's this yellow thing again? So what just happened here? Ovulation, which in English means the egg is doing what? Leaving the follicle. All right, so in ovulation, the egg leaves the nest, or the egg leaves the follicle. Or egg leaves the nest is fine, unless I ask you specific for follicle. So in ovulation, the egg or oocyte is leaving the cells around it. Make sense?
That's all inside the ovary.
That's inside the ovary, because the ovary is where we make our eggs. Right? But now I'm going to show you this picture. Oh, no, I'm not. I forgot my picture. Hold on. There we go.
But the yellow around the releasing, is that still a follicle cell?
Indeed it is. So I'm going to just put this in context. Here's your ovary when we make eggs or release eggs or whatever word you want to use. And then this is not to scale, so don't forget. Okay? Here we have primordial follicles. Remind me from Biology 101 where the primordial sea was. What was that? When was that?
The beginning.
Long ago, right? Far away at the beginning. So, in English, these are beginning follicles. So these are what you'd form before birth, right? So before birth, you've made baby follicles containing baby eggs. Quote, quote. So far, so good? And what do we do once a month once we hit puberty?
Ditch one.
You start to make eggs and ovulate. So let's look. Here we have follicles, and they're doing what?
Surrounding
They're growing or enlarging. Saladin says maturation. Fine. So here are my follicles getting bigger along with the eggs inside of it. So in this picture, the oocyte's the little fancy egg in the center. The follicle's out here. Yes?
In the primordial follicles, there's the oocyte in it as well.
Right.
Okay.
Just the one stopped in meiosis one.
And then, so when it goes into its second meiosis,
Right.
is that what makes the follicle start developing?
Yes.
Okay. And only one happens per month?
Correct. You should only release one. One should finish per month.
Okay.
So doing okay so far? So here's my huge follicle with my huge egg. right? Then tell me again what's happening right here.
Ovulation.
Ovulation. So the egg, which is this huge beast over here, is leaving the follicle. So the follicle stays in your ovary. The egg takes a hike. Right? Where's it going to go?
Down the fallopian.
It's your fallopian tube to find Mr. Sperm. Right?
Sorry,
Yes.
primordial, primary, secondary.
Yes.
Then what? Ovulation?
Then you don't call it anything anymore.
Then nothing.
Right.
Then ovulation.
Right.
Okay.
But wait, let's keep going. Because look here. Tell me what these yellow things are. What are those? Yellow body. Yes. That yellow body. What are they? Old follicles. Empty nest. Empty follicles. So the trick you want to catch your mind around is the egg leaves, but the follicle doesn't. So after you ovulate, you still have the follicles in your ovary. They just don't have any eggs in them. Yes?
Do you reuse them?
No. They're a one-time deal. So you don't get to recycle those. So if we put all this together in your ovary, so you're going to grow eggs each month, assuming you're at puberty, along with the follicles. The egg leaves the follicle, ovulation, and the follicle stays behind. And we call this as corpus luteum. But that's the follicle the egg used to be in. Yes?
Does that just kind of form like a little tiny blip of a scar on
It does. And worthless trivia, you can look at a slide on ovary and count those. So I know how many, if I did a biopsy of you, I know how
kind
many
of
eggs
how
you
many
have.
pods are deployed from
Yes.
the mothership?
Exactly right. Yes. Yes.
So I read that each month you like about 1,000 eggs die.
It's probably a bit high.
But how
okay.
is, I mean, what is going on with all those ones that aren't becoming the egg? I mean, why are a bunch of them dying?
How many eggs should you release each month?
Well, I know one, but why are a bunch dying? Why aren't they just
Because they're
not doing
racing.
anything?
So what happens is, this is the one you really want to know. Your body has, you start out birth with like 100,000 eggs, right? Well, they all want to ovulate. So each month, they all start to develop. Whoever's the fastest gets to finish development. The ones that started and didn't finish stop.
Okay.
And so each month, some of them are stopping, and then some of those degrade. So each month, you release one egg, and a bunch of losers stay behind. And then each month you're doing that, the next one in the line gets to go, and the next one back gets to stay.
So with twins, you can drop 2 eggs though, right?
With fraternal twins, yes, you
Okay.
ovulate double, right? 2
Okay.
eggs, yes.
So do the follicles end up taking up room on the ovary that will eventually prevent further ovulation?
They do shrink though, but they don't take up that much room. But yes, they're still there. So far so good? So yes,
What happens if you don't ovulate?
then you don't make a follicle empty. Well, then you just look like this,
And that's okay.
I guess.
What happens then?
It just stays there. Because if you're pregnant, right, 9 months, you won't have ovulation. If you're lactating, you won't have ovulation for more than that.
Ever.
Ever, ever?
Yeah.
We don't know because we have to kill you to find out.
Oh, okay.
It's hard
You
to-
don't have to kill them, you just have to rip
Yeah.
the ovaries out.
Ovaries out, and then see if you die. So let me show you an animation of this before you get too bogged down. Then we'll go through the menstrual cycle. So here we go about follicle and oocyte.
A primordial follicle consists of an oocyte surrounded by a single layer of squamous granulosa cells.
Big deal.
A primordial follicle becomes a primary follicle as the granulosa cells become enlarged and cuboidal.
No one cares.
The primary follicle enlarges, and the granulosa cells form more than one layer. The zona pellucida forms around the oocyte.
Okay.
The structure is called a secondary follicle when fluid-filled vesicles develop among the granulosa cells and a well-developed capsule, or theca, becomes apparent around the granulosa cells.
In English, what is my follicle doing in this animation?
Inflating?
Differentiating, growing, maturing. So the egg is developing, that's the little spot there. And the nest it's in is also developing. So they kind of work hand in hand, yes.
So they define a follicle as the egg and the cells around it, but you said the follicle is the cells around it.
Formally, they're not the same.
Okay.
So you can say the whole thing's a follicle, that's okay, but there's a distinction between the oocyte inside of it and the follicle cells around the outside. Because at ovulation, you don't lose the follicle, you lose the egg out of the follicle.
Right.
So there is a technical distinction
The
there.
theca possesses internal and external layers.
No one cares.
The structure is called a mature follicle when the fluid-filled vesicles form a single antrum. At full maturity, the oocyte is located in the cumulus mass.
So now we have a fully grown egg, quote, quote, and we have a fully grown follicle. So what are you going to do after you grow an egg and a follicle?
You release it.
You're going to release them. So here we go.
During ovulation, the oocyte is released from the follicle, along with some surrounding granulosa cells of the cumulus mass, called the corona radiata.
So in English, eggs leaving. Go find a sperm. But leftovers stay behind. Right?
Following ovulation, the granulosa cells divide rapidly and enlarge to form the yellow corpus luteum. When the corpus luteum degenerates, it forms the white corpus albicans.
So those are just names for the leftover follicle. Right? It looks like it's some weird looking cloud. Make sense? So when we do the menstrual cycle, which is next, you're keeping track of basically three things. The oocyte, the follicle with the oocyte in it, and the follicle without the oocyte in it. Right? And that's what your body's going to try to regulate in your menstrual cycle. So I'm going to just go back to this picture. Remember this picture?
No.
Okay. Too late. Now I'm going to draw it clearly.
Oh.
So now we have the same picture going this way, and we're going to make a big line on the board because we're going to do the menstrual cycle, and there's two phases to the menstrual cycle. There's this phase, which happened before ovulation, and a phase that happens after ovulation. And what you want to do is divide your notes, and I'm going to use the two boards, but you want to divide a line down your notes, right down the middle, as ovulation. And we're going to separate them on the board in space and time. Prepare your mind, body, and soul. So in a female system, everything is based on ovulation when the egg leaves the follicle. So we have before ovulation is going to be over here. And I'm going to put after ovulation over here. And ovulation is where the screen is. It's the dividing line in the sand. Right? Let's give these some magical names. Before ovulation, what do we call that phase in general?
Follicular?
The follicular phase. Why might we call it that?
Because the oocytes in the follicle.
Very good. So we call this the follicular phase. It's kind of a lousy color, isn't it? Because the eggs are in the follicle. That's even worse. So in the follicular phase, your eggs are in the follicle. What are the eggs doing in the follicle in the follicular phase? What do you think they're doing? They're growing, maturing, developing. So in English, you're growing eggs in the follicular phase. And the follicle grows with them because they're sort of connected physiologically. So the follicular phase means every time before you ovulate. So what do we call after you ovulate? Let's find out. Hey, a word you don't know. Luteal phase. Can someone tell me why we call it a luteal phase?
Post-ovulation.
Let's find out. Can anyone see a word underneath the arrow up here that starts with lutea?
Corpus luteum.
Corpus luteum. Because it contains a corpus luteum, which in English means yellow body, literally. But what is a corpus luteum physiologically? What is that?
Empty follicle.
Empty follicle. So when the follicle is empty, we call it a corpus luteum, just because we want to. Right? So we call it the luteal phase because the follicle is empty. Why is it empty? Because you lost the egg back there. Is that okay? So we have our follicular phase where I'm growing eggs and follicles. Egg takes a hike. Leftovers become corpus luteum. Now I'm in the luteal phase. Make sense? All right. Now we're going to add hormones to this magic. So we're going to go up to this graph, which is showing two hormones you learned last week. So we're going to learn them again. Remind me where those hormones come from. Very good. What tells the anterior pituitary to make them? Yay! So let's review. So we're going to have the hypothalamus. We'll be talking to the anterior pituitary. This is going to be talking to the what? This is a girl, so we're going to talk to ovaries, I hope. Well, let's review. What was the name of the hormone that the hypothalamus uses to talk to an anterior pituitary? GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone. That's going to tell my pituitary to release what? LH and FSH is going to tell my ovaries to do their jobs, right? Make eggs, one. So there's the same pathway you learned last week with the male, just now we're going to have a little more complexity to it. So if you look at this picture, LH and FSH are basically doing the same job, although it's FSH here. What do you think LH and FSH tells me to do in my ovaries?
FSH is to make the eggs.
Make eggs. So we're going to, FSH is going to say develop an egg or mature eggs, or oocytes if you prefer, and LH says to grow the follicles. So I'm going to grow the nest and grow the egg, because that's what my brain wants. Make sense? So I'm going to grow eggs and follicles, because that's what the follicular phase says to do. So my brain says, give me eggs. The tutor says, I got you eggs. The ovaries make the eggs and the follicle. So far, so good? All right. So then let's look what happens when you're growing an egg. So my brain, my anterior pituitary is saying, make me eggs. So I'm making the eggs. Look at this graph. These are hormones. You learned them last term. So someone tell me what those hormones are made, or where they're made. In the ovaries. So let's add some detail. So the ovaries make some hormones. Which hormone of the two there is the highest of the two? Estrogen. So in the follicular phase, the main one that we talk about is estrogen. Although progesterone's there, the estrogen's the preliminary one. What part of the ovary makes the estrogen? Or what part of the follicle do you think makes the estrogen? The oocyte or the nest? Say again.
The nest.
The nest. So the estrogen is made by the follicle. So the follicular cells are actually making the estrogen in the ovary. So as my follicles get bigger, what should estrogen do?
Get bigger.
Is that true? Let's see. Is estrogen climbing?
Yes.
Indeed it is, because my follicles are getting bigger and they make estrogen. So they're going to make more estrogen throughout the follicular phase. Make sense?
Yep.
Why are you making estrogen?
To
You can live without it. I'm a male. I don't have any.
to mature the follicle or the egg.
To make you sexy.
Make you sexy? How? How are you sexy in this picture?
It's gonna make your boobs bigger. Your boobs bigger.
Well, true. But Biology 101, you learned that you're a placental mammal. Tell me what placental mammals do. You have a placenta. Where's that located? Your uterus. Oh, we need some uterus in here. So, say hello to your uterus. This is the endometrium, also known as the uterine lining. So look where the arrow is pointing down. What do you notice about your uterine lining? Getting thicker. So you make estrogen in your follicles. The estrogen then goes to your uterus. Basically, there are receptors on the uterus that upregulate. And what are you doing to your uterus with this estrogen?
You're thickening the walls.
Thickening it up. Thicken the endometrium, which means the inner lining of uterus.
So you're growing more like blood, like it's getting more.
Get more tissue. Basically.
Yeah.
So tell me why you'd want a thicker uterus.
So you can hold on to a baby.
So a baby can live there. You're a placental mammal, babies live in that. So if I'm going to have a baby, I need to thicken my uterus so the baby has a home. So your follicle's going to make estrogen in your ovary that's going to go to your uterus and tell your uterus to get ready for pregnancy. Right? So my brain says make me eggs. The follicle that's told to grow is making estrogen to tell my uterus what to do. Brain to ovary to uterus. Make sense?
Perfectly.
Perfectly. This is classic. All right. So to piece this all together, like on an exam per se, I would say something like, okay, my anterior pituitary makes LH and FSH. It tells me to grow eggs and follicles. The follicles make estrogen, which goes up. The estrogen tells me to get a thick uterus. All before you ovulate.
Can you write that?
I can try. I thought I did.
No, just like that. Okay.
Oh.
All in a line.
I should say no. I should be meaner.
So is this phase 2 weeks?
Yes, normally. Well, it's
Okay.
It varies, but it can be any size you want. It's the second phase that matters. So. If I were studying, I'd do that. LH and FSH makes me grow follicles, which makes estrogen go up, which makes my uterus go up. And just fill in the details accordingly. Make sense? Lots of arrow. But basically in the follicular phase, your goal is to grow eggs, grow follicles, grow uterus. You grow, grow, grow. Right? But wait! Now we have to go to my next part. What was the dividing line in this whole thing?
Ovulation.
Okay, let's figure out how in the world do you know that the egg is ready to hatch? Quote, quote.
Your temperature goes up slightly.
It does. That's from the brain, though. How does your brain know there's an egg there?
It. No,
Let me
it.
show you a picture. Let's look at that graph. What do you see there?
A
A spikes over here, because I don't want to screw up your notes moving forward. We're going to talk about the signs of ovulation. Surge, spike, large amount, pick a word. What's spiking? What are those? FSH
And LH. And LH.
LH. So, when those begin to climb in the anterior pituitary, that tells your ovary to release the egg. So you ovulate when those spike, like here.
So that's day 14, it looks like?
If you did a 28-day cycle.
Okay.
Well, now my question is, where are these made again? Where's FSH and LH made? How does my pituitary know there's an egg there? Negative feedback, good femur. Okay, Darwin, sure. Let's go down to this graph here. Take a look at the red graph again. What do you see?
Spike in estrogen.
Spike in estrogen. And where does estrogen come from?
From the ovaries.
From the follicles. So think about if I'm a brain. If your estrogen levels are climbing really, really high, I can infer that that means your follicles are really, really what? Big, which means you have a really, really big, high-raised egg. Right? So as the eggs develop and the follicles develop, the estrogen levels climb. That induces the spike in the brain. So the ovulation is caused by the spike in LH and FSH. This spike is caused by an increase in estrogen.
Isn't there an increase in progesterone too?
Not as much, although there's some. It mostly is after ovulation.
Because that keeps the pregnancy.
Right, that'd be after. So as your follicles grow and you make more estrogen, that causes your brain to spike the FSH and LH, which causes you to release the egg. In this case, the uterus is talking, the ovaries are talking to the brain, talk to the ovaries again. Cool so far? So we just ovulated. Now, let's shift our gears. We've ovulated. Let's look at our graph. Post-ovulatory phase. What's that big yellow thing one more time?
Corpus luteum.
Why is it still there?
Because the egg is gone. It's an empty
Yeah, but
nest.
why is it still here? I mean, it's gone. Why doesn't it just like blow up? It does. So notice the little red arrow. What hormone do you see there?
LH.
LH. So in the luteal phase, the anterior pituitary is going to produce mostly LH. What do you think that L stands for in LH? Remember that from last term? Luteum, luteinizing, lut. So what does LH tell your ovaries to do? So LH goes to the ovaries and says maintain the corpus luteum. Keep the corpus luteum around. So why? But now the question: why in the world do I want why do I want an empty nest? I mean, that's pointless. What is it? Yes. Let's look at this graph. Let's look at the green graph for a minute. Green graph is what? And what's it doing? Spiking. If you look at the shape of this graph, you notice it corresponds to development of the corpus luteum. So where do you think that progesterone is coming from? Say ye. From the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum produces progesterone. Lousy color. This one, I like shocking red. It's going to increase progesterone. If you think about it, right, the follicle made estrogen over there. The follicle on this stage is going to make another hormone. But because it's an empty follicle, the hormone changes. Same cells, same place, different job. So those follicles made estrogen before ovulation, turn around and make progesterone after ovulation. By magic. Right? So tell me why you want progesterone.
To keep a pregnancy.
Let's find out. Here's our uterine lining again. Look at that picture and tell me how it's changed. A little thicker. What else? What
More vascular.
More vascular. So we're going to make our progesterone is to increase blood flow to the uterus. Formerly to the endometrium, I guess. Tell me, placental mammals, why you want blood flow to your endometrium.
To feed your baby.
To feed your baby. Your baby's going to suck you dry. Financially, spiritually. I'm free, I know this. All right. Blood through the endometrium. So I'm increasing blood for the placental mammal. So I grew it thick before ovulation. Now I'm making it bloody after ovulation. And what else am I doing? Well, it looks like I'm maintaining the endometrium. I'm maintaining the thickness. I'm keeping it there. So after ovulation, my LH tells me to have a corpus luteum, which makes progesterone, which tells me to keep my uterus thick and make it more bloody. Because baby's coming. Make sense? Sure. I want me to do that later. I'll do it just as fair. So let's see. So LH is going to make, let's see, increase in progesterone. That's going to make an increase in blood in uterus. Why didn't I put any ovocytes on this picture?
Because they're not involved.
They're not involved. They're gone, right? You sent them away. So after ovulation, all we're dealing with is the follicle and the uterus, because there's no longer an oocyte to talk to. It went away. Right? So after ovulation, you're going to thicken and bloody your uterus. Make sense? Now comes the harder question. Go back up here. Can someone look at this picture? What does regressive mean in English? Shrinking, dying, going away, atrophy. So, in English, your corpus luteum goes away. So, here it is. It's gone away. So tell me, what should happen to progesterone if the corpus luteum is not there? Okay, that's true. Indeed, it begins to drop off. So if you don't have any progesterone, what should your uterus do?
Shrink.
Shrink and
Release.
get rid of blood.
Yeah.
So what do you call that?
Menstruation.
You're menstruating. You are releasing the blood and bloody thickness that you had the other 2 weeks. So when the corpus luteum goes away, you lose everything you just built. Over here, we're going to contrast ovulation with menstruation. I'm going to say dies, you realize it doesn't actually quote die. Your corpus luteum died. When does it die? How long did it take to die? Yeah, so if you look at the math here, it's alive for about a week after you ovulate, and then it dies. So it dies basically 2 weeks after ovulation. So, give or take a day, but most it's 2 weeks after ovulation, it has died. It's atrophied, it's whatever. So what happens to progesterone when my corpus luteum dies? It goes down. I lose my progesterone. And therefore I'm going to lose my what? Thick and bloody uterus. So I don't maintain, is that English? Don't maintain the endometrium. And so what do you do with things you don't maintain? You flush them away. Therefore you menstruate. You're losing the thick and bloody uterus you built up the rest of the time. So 2 weeks after you ovulate, you'll start menstruating. That means your corpus luteum died, your progesterone went with it, therefore there's nothing to tell your uterus what to do. So
I have a question. So why do girls who start puberty, they have one period usually and then don't start it until later?
They call it hormonal balance. The pituitary is sort of learning the game.
Got it.
So as you're starting out puberty, the pituitary is kind of regulating the system, and then eventually you learn.
But they still go through that process,
Yep.
right? Okay.
You menstruated, you by definition had to ovulate 2 weeks earlier. That's how it works, yes.
But I think I asked that question from the earlier.
Okay,
What happens if that never happens?
if menstruation never happens,
Ovulating may or may not happen, but menstruation never happens.
then you never ovulated.
So they're one and the same.
Yes. You have to ovulate to have a menstrual flow.
And
If
what
you never menstruated, then either you never ovulated or you're suppressing the ovulation.
Okay,
It's like being pregnant. You never menstruate during pregnancy because you never ovulate.
but there's still eggs.
Yes, they just never come on.
So what okay.
So
So
in
if
the
you
case
like
of
doesn't that
female
start with
athletes or something.
Right, like amenorrhea.
Yeah.
Stay stop. Yep. Yeah, so like I think your homework question coming up is on that. So like female athletes, they lose so much body fat, the brain says you'll never survive pregnancy, that it just turns off these signals. So you still have the eggs, they're just sitting there doing nothing. They're right here. And so they never finish the sequence.
But it screws up all your hormones. Because you're not, I mean, at that point, you're not, right?
The argument, yeah, so in theory you wouldn't be releasing any of these. Which wouldn't be doing any of this, which would do none of that. And so that's why you're not doing this. Right. For example, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, screws up your menstrual cycle because it screws up hormonal regulation, keeping this going. Same kind of thing. But you still have eggs, it's just whether they work or not. Yes?
No, never mind.
Is it, so are you saying it's possible for exercise to be used as birth control?
Yes. I would not recommend that as a modern. Not so much exercise, it's low body fat due to exercise. And poor diet. So anorexics, in theory, don't ovulate because their brain says you're going to die if you do.
Isn't it also like when they have way too much fat too?
Yes, too much fat then shifts you to kind of the same effect but the different reason. Instead of being low body fat, high body fat ends up being a steroid reserve which sucks up your estrogen and throws off the pituitary axis. Worthless trivia, as a farmer, you always sell your fattest animals because they never breed. The fat sheep goes to auction. The skinny sheep, she's good. This really skinny sheep, she's dead. So that's the rule. The fat cow never breeds.
So,
Yeah.
when you become pregnant, you need the progesterone.
Yes, you
So
do.
does that corpus luteum not regress?
That's right.
Okay.
So we do pregnancy next week.
I thought it was, I was jumping in,
Oops,
but I
sorry.
just.
That's fine, yeah. So next week we'll figure out why you don't menstruate when you're pregnant. You're doing okay. So if we put this all together, so you want to look in your book and or take pictures of your phone. So this is showing everything. So pre-ovulatory follicular phase. My brain says make eggs. I make eggs. That makes estrogen. That makes uterus. Everything spikes. I lose my egg, but my follicle stays behind. Now my follicle is going to be a corpus luteum for a couple of weeks. That makes progesterone for a couple of weeks. Keeps my uterus thick and bloody for a couple of weeks. I'm not pregnant. Goodbye. Flush. Reset. And the brain goes again. All right? Make sense? Yes.
So what's happening with progesterone-only birth controls?
This is the same. Basically what you're doing is you're forcing the brain to stay here.
To stay pregnant.
But you still menstruate on them.
You don't have to.
But, okay.
Usually
you wouldn't
you
formally
don't.
menstruate. Because
Okay,
your
so
theory was-
but when you drop off, then
Right.
it.
The
okay.
sugar pill, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
Makes sense? So now let's add some lingo here. So look at these spikes here and here. In 231, first day of class, you learned what would make something go way, way up.
Negative feedback.
Not negative.
Positive feedback.
Positive feedback. So lo and behold, this phase over here is because of positive feedback. One of the few times in this class I want you to say that and not get yelled at.
Okay.
So the follicular phase or the pre-ovulatory phase is an example of positive feedback because otherwise the graphs would never spike, right? Your body would keep everything suppressed. So once I start making eggs, my body encourages more and more egg development. So then, let's go over here. After ovulation, Can you tell me, looking at this graph, what you think it is? It's negative feedback after ovulation. Same organs, one day apart. And you've switched from a positive feedback event to a negative feedback event in 24 hours. Cool, huh? Receptor change. Let me show you I'm not making this up. Right. Let's see what they have to say about it.
During the menstrual cycle, before ovulation, small amounts of estrogen are secreted from the ovary.
What would be making that estrogen?
Your
The follicles. Remember, you have all these follicles in your ovary, right? You made them before you were born. So they're all making a little bit of estrogen because that's what they do. Right?
Estrogen stimulates the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary.
Just so you know, this animation doesn't talk about FSH, but it would also be there. Right? They just left it off the animation. So don't.
And doesn't it just go to the hypothalamus, which then tells the anterior pituitary?
Correct. But there are also receptors in the pituitary as well.
Oh, okay.
So you're right.
Gonadotropin-releasing hormone also stimulates release of luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Luteinizing hormone, in turn, causes release of additional estrogen from the ovary. The levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone and luteinizing hormone increase in the blood due to this positive feedback effect.
So what should the graph be doing during this time? Everything's going to climb, and as this builds up, I'm going to start spiking my estrogen, spiking my FSH, spiking my LH. So positive feedback's occurring before ovulation. That's why everything's going up, up, up.
After ovulation, the corpus luteum is formed in the ovary and begins to secrete progesterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Progesterone inhibits the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary.
And what I say to inhibit is negative feedback. Now I've magically switched in 24 hours from now turning on my brain to turn on my ovaries to turning off my brain. Right? Yes?
Does this prevent another egg?
You bet. You only want one baby at a time. So once I have one egg, I wait until it's done. So if we add more detail over here to our after ovulation phase. So increase in progesterone. What should increasing progesterone do to my LH and FSH, or my brain, or my hypothalamus? What should it do? Should inhibits GnRH, FSH, and LH. So when I have progesterone, I'm going to turn off the brain. And if my brain's turned off, what will my ovaries do or not do?
Release eggs.
They're not going to release eggs, right? Because it takes a brain to do it. So that's also going to inhibit ovulation. So I'm inhibiting my brain, and that's going to inhibit my ovaries because I can't do eggs until I tell them to come on. So as long as I have progesterone, or the luteal phase, my brain turns off because I don't want 2 eggs this month. I want only 1 egg this month. I'm going to turn every other egg off. Yes?
So what's the, where's the shift? Is it when the corpus luteum regresses, then that shifts it back to the turning on all the other stuff?
So when the corpus luteum degrades, and it upregulates the pituitary back over there. Again, in about a week time. So the same organs change how they're viewing the same information, depending on which side of the line you're on. Right? So let's keep watching our video.
Blood levels of gonadotropin-releasing hormone and luteinizing hormone decrease because of this negative feedback effect.
In English, I'm turning off my brain so I don't get more eggs. Right? Make sense? If I go back to my picture, when I lose my corpus luteum, and I lose my progesterone, and I'm menstruating, what will my brain then do if the progesterone levels go down? It says, oh, I need to make another egg. That didn't work. Let's have babies. So your brain says, let's try this again. It goes back to positive feedbacking, that's even a verb, your ovaries. So you go, blah, 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 oh, no baby, reset. Blah, 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 no baby, reset. Right?
I know this is biology, but I'm wondering about chickens. Does the same thing happen with them?
Yes.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But they have this peculiar system where they release an egg every day and they put a shell on it. So not that you care, but a chicken's butt basically, you'll have a shelled egg, a non-shelled egg, and a primordial egg. And as each one travels down, it wraps a shell and kicks it out, just like that. So, but her brain's operating on the sunlight length to determine when to do this.
The sunlight, really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Eggs normally only from spring to fall.
Yeah.
Eggs in the winter because if it's wintertime, you can't raise chickens, right? Chicks will die in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
So the chickens are smart enough to realize I have to have sunlight.
Is that the pineal gland?
Yeah, so their pineal gland is light sensitive. So if you have eggs in the wintertime, it's because a farmer kept a light bulb on in the hen house.
Oh.
Fools them to think it's something. No. You need to get out in the farm, people!
I know.
Hey! I'm the only one that lives on one? Yes.
So, okay, well,
Yeah.
first of all, I guess I have a question about when
Yes.
people say like twins run in my family. Is
Yes.
that just folksy, or is that?
No, there's a
There's a
genetic
biological-
predisposition for that.
Is that a genetic predisposition to just kind of having a slow negative feedback loop?
Yes.
Okay.
Or it's a genetic predisposition to double ovulate. So what happens normally, this is just gee whiz kind of trivia.
Okay.
Normally, your ovaries alternate. So if the right-hand ovary ovulates this month, normally it's the left-hand ovary next month. We're showing this race. You can have it where both ovaries ovulate together. So you have two eggs. That's genetically predisposed in most people. So if you tend to have twinning, it's because for some reason your ovaries tend to be tied in their race. So you'll double ovulate. Also due to diet will affect that as well. But that's kind of what happens. But
And
normally
this
you
is the
wouldn't
mom's
occur
side.
that. It would
How
just
do
be
you
one.
diet to have twins?
Again, I'm the only farmer in this room, huh?
Yeah.
Didn't we know that? Oh, if you feed ruminants high grain before they breed, they'll double ovulate.
So same for people.
Yeah.
Well, no one's done study. I'd have to force you to eat and then force you to breed. That's considered that. Right.
But
Yeah,
if,
if you're having sheep, if you give them new pasture than a ram, they'll twin because their brain thinks there's lots of food. There must be time to raise lots of babies, right? And then you could breed for that. But anyway, yeah.
But the genetic is only for fraternal, like
Right.
identical's random.
Yeah, identical has nothing to do with that.
I heard otherwise though. Male, it's on the male side, genetically.
Mm.
Really?
Identical twinning has no genetic composition to it.
But it's from the male.
It's just a,
Basically, the only one that matters is the female, because sperms, you have millions of sperm every time. Sperm is irrelevant. It's the number of eggs you ovulate that matters. That's the female line. So the female's genetics matter in twinning.
That's
so
interesting.
that's just some stem cells that split off and then
Yes.
develop into two.
Right. And fathers can pass it on to their daughters, but only the daughters matter. Because sperm, you have millions of anyway.
Great, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
when you have like Octomom,
Oh
Octomom.
yeah, her. Yeah.
like
Michael
are
Jackson.
they
did
just,
that
are
too.
they just inhibiting the progesterone and like increasing estrogen in order to?
They're basically shoving her to that side.
Yeah, doing that on like
Yeah.
hyperactive.
Yeah.
IVF.
But
Yeah. So you do high follicular phase.
But they put embryos in her. This was beyond all this. They stimulated the eggs and got them out, and then when that doctor put 6 embryos in her, and the 2 of them split into twins.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, so
Isn't there where people are releasing more than one egg at once though, in order
Yes.
as fertilization?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's for the ovulation part. They don't, and then they put the sperm in outside, and then they put the embryos in
Right.
for IVF.
Yes.
But I think my question was as far as the ovulation part.
Yeah.
Right. So under normal conditions, most people would never ovulate more than 2. Fraternal triplets are rare because the idea that you have to ovulate 3.
I'm that. I'm a fraternal triplet.
See, that's rare.
I know.
Quadruplets are unheard of, so the number of fraternals you have is how many eggs you have to release at the same time, which means your ovaries had to somehow all respond, which is just statistically so rare to do. Yes.
So if a woman is going to, I don't know, harvest her ovaries, is she taking really high doses of estrogen?
That's one of the treatments.
Okay.
They have other chemicals that induce ovulation or induce follicular growth. So that's the idea, is you're trying to keep the woman on the left-hand side of the curve, and then sit there with your syringe when she does that line there. You don't want her over here.
So in the case of identical twins,
That's after you conceive. So you had 1 egg, 1 sperm, and now you split it afterwards the babies. So that's why they're the same. They're the same person, just split in half.
Oh, really?
That's separate than this.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're genetically identical. Make sense? So let me show you, before we haul off too much here. Let's go to PBS. Let's figure out the menstrual cycle, and then we'll talk about other things here. So this does not have a narration, so I'll do a British accent or something for you. But the best thing is that with little key ideas here. So I have low levels of hormones at the beginning of your cycle, That's going to tell your brain to make more, right? I wanted a baby, that's your brain's perception. So I'm going to make FSH and LH. That goes from my pituitary to where? My ovaries. That tells me to do what? Make eggs, make follicles, and there I go. And now I'm building estrogen because I'm growing an egg. So my estrogen graph should climb as my brain's turning on my ovaries. Everyone with me?
Mm-hmm.
That's basically pre-ovulatory. Okay, so remember you have all those baby eggs, but one takes over. Here, it's not anatomically correct, right? And then progesterone, estrogen increases because I'm growing a follicle. Estrogen's going to go back up to your brain and go to positive feedback. I'm going to get more and more stuff to happen. Plus, I'm going to grow my uterus. So here we go. Here's my uterus. There it is, getting thicker. Right? It's blinking, that means thicker. Right? Alright, so I'll just pass this one right to here. So, here I am with high levels of estrogen. I'm going to surge, which is over there, and that's going to make me ovulate. Right? Oh, what's the cervix thing? Why does my cervix need to thin and become permeable?
So that the
Sperm, right? That's the goal of this thing. Sperm can meet the egg. So you're going to open your cervix when you ovulate to let the sperm in. Hey, what's that traveling down your fallopian tube? It's an egg. You just ovulated, right? Because I spike. Right? But now we're going to go to post-ovulatory luteal phase. Blah, blah, blah. Ruptured follicles, now magically corpus luteum, progesterone, makes uterus get nice and endometrial favorable, which means thick and bloody. And now notice, suppressing the brain. I don't want any other eggs, I want this one to finish. So that's where the negative feedback comes in. Make sense?
So I watched this show and it talked about during ovulation, women start like their faces start to,
Yes.
and like their smell, they're like more
Yep.
for guys.
Yep. So
Your faces start
your
to
sex
Well,
drive
like,
changes,
get more
the person you'll
pinker
cheat
and-
on changes, your breast size changes, your lip size changes, your eye color slightly dims, and then there's all this other stuff.
Are you more pleasing, like emotionally? Well, I mean,
I am on tape, I have to tread carefully. You're more likely to cheat when you ovulate, and your husband's more likely to be jealous of you when you're ovulating.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. Men who never call will call when you're ovulating. The London study. Anyone know? Am I the only one who reads the London study? Yes. And also your taste and sexual attraction changes during your ovulatory cycle.
Does it go down or up?
It changes.
What does that mean?
Women are more attracted to their masculine.
You've never read the London studies, huh?
No.
This is totally, this is worth, I'll just never on a test, so don't even waste. But they found out in the London and Leeds studies that the type of men that women find attractive varies by ovulatory cycle. So the analogy, this is kind of stereotypical, but you may be married to the accountant type, stable, and comes home for dinner. When you're ovulating, you want the biker dude. So you're more likely to cheat with someone who's flashy and exciting only when you ovulate, even though he's not someone you'd ever marry, because you want stability when you're pregnant, but you want exciting genes when you're ovulating.
Huh.
So they call it the selfish gene hypothesis, where you're seeking these genes for your baby, but you want someone home to raise the kids, so you're trying to play both ways.
That's
During
so
ovulation is when you
interesting.
commit adultery.
And that's true in a lot of animals,
Yes.
right? Like birds. And
Yep, birds will do that. That's where they got the idea, is birds will do this all day long. But
Yeah.
humans, it came out in the London study that it comes to be true.
Men have a phase on dudes.
No, men get more jealous when you ovulate.
Yeah, but how do men know?
Men cheat all the time because they're dogs.
Well, I saw it with chimpanzees, and they showed their butts were getting like
Yeah.
redder.
Your butt doesn't get ready though.
Well, I know, but I
Are you sure about that? You don't know what people do at home.
I'm relatively sure about that. You're about doing, you have a big red butt, right? Let's go back to here. I'm trying to lose you all. All right. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Where was I? Okay. So, progesterone, corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, blah, blah, blah. So now we go here. So the uterine lining begins to break down because I've lost progesterone, I've lost my corpus within 2 weeks, and now I'm going to menstruate. There it goes, blinky, blinky, fill up, flush. And you just lost everything you made for 4 weeks, and you're going to redo it again.
Just
Right?
plunge it out.
Plunge it out. Here's an interesting question. Why bother doing that? You spend all that time and money building this tissue. Why flush it? Other animals don't. Your cow doesn't do this.
really?
Risk of infection?
Right? Only humans dogs, one species of bat, and one species of some African thing I don't remember off the top of my head, menstruate.
Oh, because we're being punished, right?
Yeah. Well, think about it. Do you have to buy tampons for your cat?
Isn't that the old story?
No. No. They don't release blood every month like this.
But they do have spiky penises, which is unpleasant.
But dogs do it, it's a cycle, it's like once a year.
Right, that's
For
just
dogs,
a year.
yeah.
Okay, do okay on menstrual cycle.
But now I want to know, why do we do it once a month?
Get out your packet of eggs.
Wait, so why?